Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. The 90s was a great time for games. The 16-bit era was upon us and we had a ton of amazing titles. Most companies tried their hand at some sort of mascot character as well, most of them animals, and that's where we got Bubsy the Bobcat. Accolade, who were one of those games companies who only put out stuff that was maybe mediocre at best, thrust this one upon us. Bubsy was pushed really hard and they really thought he was going to be a smash, giving him the classic 90s tude, which means he's an annoying loudmouth that won't shut up, and even having a cartoon series that was in the works. But we all know how that turned out. Over the years, there's been nearly 10 games starring the bastard Bobcat, but are they any good? Well, in an episode that I would like to dedicate as a birthday present to Goobs from the Secret Levels podcast, he is Bubsy's #1 fan, so I played all of them to see exactly why he got that Bubsy tattoo. Now, how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we find out what could possibly go wrong. It all started with Bubsy in Claws Encounters of the Third Kind. This is the Super Nintendo version. Bubsy is a platform game where you play as the annoying Bobcat who has to traverse some large levels collecting balls of yarn while taking down the evil Woolies, an alien race who are up to no good. The gameplay is pretty simple, and your standard platform game stuff. You go from left to right collecting anything you find and you jump on the heads of enemies to defeat them. The problem is that the game doesn't control well at all, and it moves incredibly fast, and you can only take one hit before you die. It really is one of the most tedious games I've played for the system. And on top of that, you can't jump on all enemies, and the only way to know which ones you can do is of course to jump on it, assuming it will die, only to see yourself lose a life. A lot of the scenery will kill you as well, even touching things like a manhole cover kills you. There's a lot of trial and error to know what is deadly and what is just a regular flower or something. Because the world is so deadly, you have to move pretty slowly through the levels, making Bubsy's speed totally useless and actually a hindrance. Bubsy can also glide, which can come in handy in skipping large portions of the levels. However, you are open to touching the evil scenery or enemies, and also have no idea where you're going to land, usually resulting in you landing in a bottomless pit. And of course, Bubsy suffers from fall damage, so make sure you use the glide every time you jump, or you'll be dying a lot just because you've fallen about twice your height. There are boss fights if you have the patience to get to them, and these are equally annoying thanks to the poor hit detection and one-hit deaths. It's a real shame though, as the game looks great with some excellent graphics and animation. There's loads of cool scrolling here, and there really are some hints of a good game. And this really could have been fun if they just play-tested it properly. Surely they realised that this was just annoying to play. Literally just letting Bubsy have 3 hits or getting rid of the fall damage would have improved things so much. I really struggle to find nice things to say about this game, and other than it having nice graphics, there's really no reason that you should play it, unless you hate yourself. Bubsy also got a release on the Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis. It is basically the same game, warts and all. However, I do have to say that this version actually controls a little better than the Super Nintendo version. I'm not sure what it was, but it did feel more responsive. Also, you have a dedicated brake button, which I recommend getting used to. Pressing the C button will have Bubsy come to a sudden stop, which actually isn't all that useful really, thanks to the fact that you have less than a second to react to anything normally. But there were times that it stopped my toe from touching some water, which of course would have been an instant death. The abundance of one-liners are still here, and actually they're pretty good quality, which is nice. But the other sound and music have had a notable downgrade, sounding more basic, with some not very nice instrument choices. I'm not sure if it's the famous gem system, but it ain't much better if it is. I managed to get further in this version than I did in the Super Nintendo one, though that might just be because I was a bit more familiar with it by the time I got through to playing it. It's still not fun though. There's times where you think you're having fun, but then you'll walk past a tree, only for it to turn out that that tree accidentally kills you for no reason at all, and you remember that this game is just no fun. Bubsy seemed to sell well enough to warrant a sequel to be made, which is why Bubsy 2 exists. This again is the SNES version. The story goes that a new theme park has opened up, being run by the evil, greedy capitalist pig, Oinker P. Ham. Bubsy and his pals want to go there, but not when it's busy, so they break in before it opens, which surely kind of makes them the bad guys. It was a bad idea either way, because everything in there wants to kill you, probably because they played Bubsy 1. The game is a non-linear one this time, so there's 10 or so levels, and these are represented by floors. You can tackle each level and floor in any order that you like, but there are only a handful of themes. There's Egypt, space, fantasy and music. You can choose which level you want to do from the hub by entering the one with the picture above it, except if you want to use the space level. To do that you have to go through the pirate picture, which doesn't make any sense, and the music is even pirate based as well. Turns out there was meant to be a pirate themed level and they didn't make it into the final game, but of course they didn't bother to change the logo or anything. Thanks to the Secret Levels podcast for that fun fact. No matter what level you choose though, you're going to have a bad time. For me, this game is even worse than the first one. The levels are large and maze-like with arrows dotted around and are meant to help you find your way, only they're about as useless as Toby Von Doom in a spelling bee. Sorry Toby. The goal is simple enough though, you have to get to the end of the level, but they really went overboard with the enemies here. There's so many of them all over the place and they're seemingly put in just random places. Of course the hit detection is terrible and enemies will hit you from a good number of pixels away as well. Thankfully you can actually take a few hits this time before dying, which does really help. The enemy designs are all related somewhat to the level that you're on, and you'll meet a variety of animals dressed as mummies, spacemen, aliens and so on, but you also get random shit like eyeballs, blobs of something, pterodactyls and more. Most of them are annoying and just nonsensical. Something else they added are items to use. Here you can get a gun that has limited ammo, a portable portal that you can use to exit a level at any time to go back to the hub world, and you can get a diving suit that lets you not die immediately when you touch water. Instead, you go into a frog throwing bonus game, which you can also get to by going through certain doors. This bonus game sees you having to throw frogs at things. It controls badly, like the rest of the game, so it's not fun. The game doesn't look bad and it does seem a little sharper than the first, but honestly the controls are so much worse than the first game and this is super choppy, making the platforming and jumping on enemies a real problem. They tried adding shooter sections in as well to mix things up, but honestly these are just tedious. Somehow this game got really good reviews on release, but don't believe them, it's a horrible experience that you want to avoid. And yes, this also got a release on the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis. And it's once again the same game but with a few graphical and sound changes. The menu is a little different as well and it's now even easier to change what levels you want to start on, as you can start on the different floors if you want to. The only difference between floors though is the layout of the levels. Gameplay wise though, it's basically the same. Again, the controls are actually a little better here and everything seems to be smaller on the screen, giving you a bit more time to react and making it easier to jump on enemies. Though the hit detection is still terrible. The level layouts suck and everything moves so fast that you just don't know what's coming up and you'll die almost instantly, even though you can take a few hits. As there's fewer buttons here, you have to press up or down on the D-pad and a button to select and use your items. This actually works well enough, but having a dedicated button on the Super Nintendo version is the preferred method. Also, the music here is just horrible, really screechy, and it just makes your ears want to bleed. Not that you were planning on going out and getting this one, but stay away, it's bloody awful. And for completion's sake, here is Bubsy 2 on the Game Boy, a stripped down version that, you'll never believe it, sucks. They've kept the same non-linear approach where you choose which themed level you want to play and then you have to explore it until you find the exit, but man, it's just awful. Now the graphics aren't terrible, I mean they look it here, but on a small screen it's a lot more acceptable, and the animation on Bubsy is actually quite good. But other than that, it looks awful. The levels are just black backgrounds with random platforms and objects that vaguely resemble what they're meant to look like. There aren't as many enemies on screen here, which is a damn blessing, but the game still has loads of slowdown. Enemies tend to either stand in one place or follow a simple pattern. Often though, you can be hurt by the scenery and have no idea why. Also, the hit detection in general is just awful and way worse than the console versions, and enemies will really hurt you from miles away. This is definitely the easiest version of the game though, and I probably could have beaten it in about an hour or so if I didn't like playing it so damn much. The flying levels especially will have you wanting to rage quit early on. Yet another one to avoid. Hey, you all remember the Atari Jaguar, right? Well, good news, Bubsy got a game on that 64-bit powerhouse called Bubsy in Fractured Furry Tales, a hilarious pun on fairy tales. As you'd expect, this one sees Bubsy entering worlds based on fairy tales and having to take down the likes of the Mad Hatter, a giant, and even a sea monster. The gameplay here is much more similar to the first game. You explore some pretty large levels, collecting blobs for points, avoiding enemies and doing some dodgy platforming until you find the exit. They have reverted back to the one-hit deaths here, and they've gotten rid of the power-up system. And this has to be the most frustrating game in the whole series. While I would say that the PlayStation 1 game that we'll be looking at next is definitely the worst, this one is the most frustrating and difficult by a mile. Pretty much everything bad that I said about the previous games applies here. The game moves ridiculously fast, and having one-hit deaths means that you often have no idea what killed you. It could be a projectile that an enemy fires from off-screen that is about the same colour as the background that you could never see, or it might even just be a drop of water about 3 pixels in size. Or of course, it could literally be something that looks like part of the scenery, but actually isn't. Once again, you can die by touching just about anything. The full damage is back here, and you can even die if you run into a wall too fast. I don't understand why they let you move so quickly and then punish you for it immediately. The platforming here is also terrible. You will constantly slip off of surfaces that aren't perfectly straight, usually into bottomless pits or knee-deep water, which of course kills you straight away, as the mere touch of water is enough to kill Bubsy. Couple that with confusing levels that are huge and maze-like, but also seem to copy-paste areas, so you think you've been somewhere, but it turns out it's actually a different area of the level that just looks exactly the same. It really is just awful to play. And once again, it really is a shame, as it looks great with some nice sprite work and animation, though for a supposed 64-bit system, it's not a huge improvement over the 16-bit games. There is more talking here as well, and I do have to say that the quality of the voices is very good. The music isn't bad, but it doesn't really fit the games, which is surprising. Actually, no it isn't. It's not like they put any effort into this game. I will confess too that I actually couldn't complete a single level in this game, and I had to use passwords to see more than the first one. And every level I tried was just a miserable mess of confusing level design, randomly placed enemies, and of course, terrible hit detection. So, at least if nothing else, Bubsy is consistent. Another one to avoid. You can imagine my excitement when Bubsy 3D was released for the PlayStation 1 in 1996. Bubsy is 3D in Furbitten Planet. To give it its full title, is a 3D platform game where Bubsy is kidnapped by the evil Woolies and taken to their home planet in space. Sadly, rather than discovering he can't survive in their atmosphere and dying a painful death, Bubsy instead escapes and has to find parts of a rocket so he can fly home. You do this by exploring some very ugly 3D worlds, collecting atoms and hunting down the rocket bits that are hidden on the levels, and as you can imagine, it is not done well. To start with, the game looks atrocious. I'm not entirely sure what the levels are even meant to be. They're an ugly mess of single colour polygons with barely any texture or detail to any of them. Bubsy himself actually doesn't look too terrible, to be honest, but the enemies are just a mess of polygons that don't often make sense, even up close, and they have barely any animation. Everything just looks so unfinished. And then there's the controls, and man are they bad, but like really bad. There's no analog control here, it's all done with tank controls, but Bubsy has the turning circle of a U-boat, so if you do want to turn, most of the time you have to stop, rotate, and then go forwards. It makes basically doing anything a real chore. Collecting items is a mission in itself as well because of this, coupled with some bad collision detection means that you usually walk straight past or sometimes even through things. This also applies to platforms, of course. It's very easy to fall through them, and of course lining yourself up with them in the first place isn't easy. You do have a strafe button which can help, but you have to be standing still to strafe, so you can't circle around things. The look of the levels also makes it really hard to know where the hell you are. You've got no control over the camera, and everything looks the same with strange patterns everywhere, and I'd often have no idea where I was or where I needed to go. Thankfully though, you can take more than one hit before you die, which is good, as jumping on enemies to kill them seems to be a lottery of whether you take damage or they do. It's so inconsistent, and don't get me started on the bosses. I fought the first two and both of them were a miserable time. I still don't really know what I did to beat either of them. I do know that I died a hell of a lot though. Oh, and just to make things more annoying, you can't touch water at all. Like, even if your little toe touches it, it's an instant death. Except later on when there's swimming levels. Make your mind up. And because of the move to CD-based games, they were able to give Bubsy a ton of voice samples, and it seems like they went out of their way to make him as annoying and obnoxious and unfunny as possible. He's got one of the most annoying voices of any video game character, and on top of that, he just really isn't clever or funny. It is like they wanted everyone to hate this game. And if it was the case, then mission accomplished, as I genuinely do hate this game. It's not often that I hate a game. I think it is the worst game I've played on the PS1, and is a rare case of a game actually being as bad as everyone says it is. So yeah, make sure you go out and play it today. Unsurprisingly, we had to wait a whole 20 years for another Bubsy installment, and then Bubsy the Woolies Strike Back was unleashed upon the world. I'm playing it here on the PS5, because only the power of the PS5 can handle Bubsy, apart from all the other systems it was released for. And actually, this is the best Bubsy game there is, but does that mean it's good? The story is pretty self-explanatory. The Woolies are back and stealing all the yarn, so Bubsy goes through a bunch of levels collecting it back and defeating any of the alien bastards that he comes across along the way. This game goes back to Bubsy's roots, being a 2D platform game, though it is made up entirely of polygons, so I believe that makes it a 2.5D game. It features some quite large levels that have hundreds of wool balls in them, as well as a bunch of enemies and hazards. Your goal though is to simply get to the end of the level. If you want to, you can ignore all of the wool and enemies. They're just there for points and trophies if you're into that sort of thing. Bubsy has access to his usual array of moves. He can run, jump and do his glide thing, which are actually very helpful and responsive here. This time you have a new move though, a pounce. This is your attack. Pressing square lets you do the pounce, making you leap forward, and you'll kill any enemies in your way. This is very handy in narrow corridors. You can still jump on enemies' heads to defeat them as well, and you can combo this together with your pounce for some pretty cool combos actually. It's actually quite fun to use. Bubsy can still only take one hit here, but the game is a lot more forgiving. You've got plenty of lives and actually power-ups that give you one extra hit, and these can be found in the stages, but they've also gotten rid of the things that completely ruined the previous games. There is no longer full damage, and Bubsy even comments on this throughout the game. Also, he runs at a normal pace and not like a hyperactive mentalist. And also, the camera is zoomed out quite far, meaning you can actually see what's around you and have time to react to enemies and hazards. Levels also contain keys. If you're a completionist, you'll need to find all the keys in the levels as they open a vault somewhere else on the stage that always contains a ton of the balls. Graphically, the game is fine. It's nothing special though. It's got that low budget look to it, which isn't bad, it's just basic. But it runs smoothly and actually has pretty decent controls. The music is pretty forgettable, and of course Bubsy talks way too much, as that's kind of his thing. He'll be repeating the same 4 or 5 phrases over and over again, which definitely does get annoying. But this is actually not a bad game. It's just painfully average. I did have some fun while playing it, and it's not one that you need to go out of your way to avoid. It's more that it's just one of those games that really has no reason to exist, other than for idiots like me to include in a video. And Bubsy's last game, as of the making of this video I believe, is Bubsy Paws on Fire, and I'm playing it here on my Steam Deck. Thankfully it was on sale recently. Bubsy and his mates are at a yarn party, of course they are, and then your woolly friend appears to tell you that the bad guy from the second game, Oinker P. Ham, has returned. And at this point the intro cutscene had gone on for way too long and the characters were way too annoying, so I skipped it. The gameplay here is still a 2.5D platform game, but for some reason they've decided to make it an auto-scroller, which really makes the game feel like it should be on mobiles, not one for PC, PlayStation and Switch. So yeah, you know the gameplay. You will run automatically from left to right, and you just need to make it to the end of each level while collecting as many of the wool balls as you can and avoiding enemies. Every level also has 3 parts of a medal. You'll need to collect all 3 of these on each level, and that's how you open up the next levels, by having enough. You have 3 worlds to play through, and each one has 9 levels. Interestingly, you get 3 characters to choose from. You've got Bubsy, of course, who has all of his moves from the previous game, so you can glide and also use your pounce move. Combining all of these is often required to collect every item on the level. Then you have Virgil. He's a nerdy rat thing who has made a funky helmet. His abilities are that he can slide really far and use his helmet to bounce off pads on the ground that send him high into the air. He can also double jump. And then there's Woolly. She's a woolly. Her levels are basically shooter levels, as you're flying in a spaceship that has a laser cannon, but crashing into walls will still kill you. The characters don't get their own levels, instead you have to play through the same one with each of the 3 characters, and they have slightly different paths based on their abilities, and to be fair, actually the layouts are changed slightly to accommodate this. Basically, Bubsy goes down the middle of the levels, Virgil stays at the bottom of the screen, and Wooly normally goes around the top. This can be a little draining as it means you have to complete each level 3 times in a row, pretty much back to back, if you want to unlock all of the levels, though they are mixed up enough that at times you won't really notice. Collecting the wool balls lets you unlock new costumes for the characters. This is purely cosmetic though and doesn't afford any benefits in wearing the other stuff. They cost a fair amount though, so you'll need to replay the levels a few times to get everything if you're that bothered. Graphics wise, it's another one that's fine. It doesn't look bad by any means, just a bit cheap and generic, though I do like all the colours and the animation is nice and smooth. Of course, the most annoying thing is the constant talking, which would be fine if it was interesting or funny, but it's neither of these things, because it's a Bubsy game. I really don't get why we still have characters like this. Surely everyone knows by now that they're not funny and are just annoying, or maybe I'm just a grumpy bastard. So yeah, this is probably the second best Bubsy game there is. It's fine. Just another game that was probably more of a waste of the developer's time than anything else. It's not offensive, but there's really no reason you need to play it. Would have been better as a phone game if you ask me. So there you go. I think that's every Bubsy game ever to be released. Just for you, Goobs. Which one is your favourite? And do you think they should give Bubsy another attempt in 3D? What about a surprise entry into Smash Brothers? As always, let me know in the comments below. I want to say a big thank you to my patron, and you too can support me on Patreon so I can buy more terrible titles. And you'll even have access to more content, too hot for YouTube, as well as gaming challenges, podcasts and more. On screen now you can see where you can follow me, so why not do so? I've got loads of great stuff for everyone to enjoy. Don't forget to check out the Secret Levels podcast as well, especially the Bubsy episodes if you want to hear grown men nearly have a breakdown. Link is in the description below. And now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.